Most people imagine the time of Jesus as a quiet spiritual world. Dusty roads, sandals, sermons, miracles, a moral story unfolding in a distant religious past. But that picture is incomplete, because for the people who actually lived there, life was not defined by theology. It was defined by money, or more accurately, by the absence of it. The world Jesus was born into was not just spiritually intense, it was economically brutal, a place where one bad harvest could erase generations, where debt meant land loss, where land loss meant social death, and where the system was designed so that escape was almost impossible. This was one of the most unequal economic systems the ancient Mediterranean had ever seen, and it wasn't broken. It was working exactly as intended. Welcome to Finance TED Official, where money, power, and history collide, and where nothing is ever as simple as it looks. Rome, the perfect extraction machine at the beginning of the 1st century, Judea sat inside the Roman Empire. Rome wasn't just a military superpower. It was the most sophisticated extraction system the ancient world had ever built. Rome didn't conquer territories to integrate them. It conquered them to fund the center. Provinces existed for one reason: to move wealth outward. Grain, silver, labor, flowing from the edges of the empire, straight into Rome. Judea was one of those edges, and that mattered because Judea wasn't rich. It was rural, agriculture, economically fragile. Most families lived on tiny plots of land. Not farms in the modern sense, just enough soil to survive. There was no margin. A good year meant survival, a bad year meant hunger, and Rome didn't care. Taxes without mercy. Rome ruled Judea through local elites and imperial officials. Kings like Herod the Great ruled with Roman approval. After his death, Roman prefects, including Pontius Pilate, took direct control. Their job wasn't to improve lives. It was to keep order and make sure revenue never stopped flowing. Taxes were the backbone of the system. But these weren't modern taxes. You didn't pay based on income or profit. You paid because you existed. Land tax, produce tax, head tax, road tolls, market fees, and then religious taxes layered on top as a payment. And the consequences were immediate. There was no IRS, no appeals process, no payment plan. Tax collection was outsourced to tax farmers. These contractors paid Rome up front for the right to collect, then squeezed the population to recover their costs plus profit. Abuse wasn't a flaw. It was the incentive. Debt, the trap with nitrogen monoxide exit. If you couldn't pay, you borrowed. Debt was everywhere. But ancient debt wasn't like modern debt. There was no bankruptcy, no restructuring, no forgiveness mechanism. Interest accumulated fast. Land was collateral. Here's how the spiral worked. A farmer plants crops. Weather fails, harvest collapses. Taxes are still due. The farmer borrows, usually from a wealthy landowner or temple-connected elite. Interest accrues. Next year improves slightly, but not enough. Debt remains. Eventually, land is seized, as the farmer becomes a tenant on his own former property, or a laborer, or disappears entirely. This wasn't accidental, it was structural. Over time, small plots vanished, large estates expanded, wealth concentrated upward. The economy didn't just produce poverty, it reproduced it. Poverty was not a failure. It was a requirement. There was no safety net, no unemployment support, no welfare, no public housing. Family was the only buffer. Charity existed, but it couldn't absorb systemic collapse. When too many people fell at once, the system offered nothing. Debt wasn't just financial. It was social. Lose your land, you lost. Status, security, identity, your family's future could vanish because of weather or policy or one unpaid obligation. This is the world Jesus was born into, and this matters. People weren't poor because they were lazy or immoral or cursed. They were poor because the system required them to be. Rome needed surplus. Elites needed rents. The temple needed revenue. All of that pressure landed on people with the least margin for error. A society under pressure, this kind of system produces something else. Tension. Judea was not quiet. Rebellions flared constantly. Banditry wasn't random crime. It was economic desperation. Messianic movements didn't emerge in comfort. They emerged in collapse. When people listened to sermons about debt forgiveness, release, justice reversal, they weren't hearing metaphors. They were hearing about economic survival. Forgiveness didn't just mean emotional relief. meant debt cancellation, escape, and escape was rare. The temple, a holy bank. Most people imagine the Jerusalem temple as purely religious. In reality, it was one of the most powerful financial institutions in the region. The temple functioned as treasury, bank, tax authority, court. Every adult Jewish male paid a yearly temple tax. Mandatory, enforced, and it had to be paid in a specific silver coin. That meant currency exchange. Money changers didn't work for free. Fees were built into the system. Sacrificial animals were sold at temple-approved prices. Religion didn't replace Roman taxation, stacked on top of it. And here's the contradiction. Temple elites were deeply intertwined with Roman power. High priests were appointed with Roman approval. Stability mattered more than justice. The institution claiming moral authority also benefited from extraction. People noticed why Jesus was dangerous. Jesus didn't operate outside this system. He spoke into it. When he talked about debt, people understood it literally. When he talked about release, they heard relief. When he talked about the poor, they saw themselves. And when he talked about the kingdom of God, they heard an alternative order. He didn't attack Rome directly. It would have ended instantly. Instead, he undermined legitimacy. He reframed the value. He questioned who deserved authority and why. Debt, wages, laborers, vineyards, masters, servants. These weren't metaphors chosen randomly. They were daily life. Then came the moment that changed everything. The temple incident, an economic act when Jesus overturned the money changers' tables. This wasn't religious theater. It was an economic confrontation. He wasn't attacking prayer. He was attacking the monetization of access to God. Calling it a den of robbers wasn't symbolic. It was literal, and that crossed a line. Rome tolerated profit. Rome tolerated teachers. Rome tolerated criticism. What it didn't tolerate was instability, especially near Passover. Crowds plus grievance equals rebellion. From the authorities' perspective, Jesus wasn't preaching. He was disrupting flows, challenging legitimacy, and making people question why suffering existed. When systems feel threatened, the Roman system could tolerate inequality. What it couldn't tolerate was disbelief, because once people stop seeing debt as destiny, extraction becomes harder to enforce. Within a generation, Judea exploded. In 66 AD, open rebellion. By 70 AD, Jerusalem was destroyed. The temple was dismantled, stone by stone. Rome didn't just suppress revolt. It erased infrastructure. But here's what people miss. The system didn't collapse. It was streamlined. Taxes intensified. Land consolidation accelerated. Debt became more bureaucratic. Rome won militarily. But it lost something else. Control of meaning. The quiet revolution Jesus wasn't leading an army. He wasn't drafting policy. He was undermining the moral logic that made extraction feel inevitable. By separating debt from moral failure, offering forgiveness outside institutions centering the poor, he challenged legitimacy itself. After the temple fell, small communities formed, shared resources, mutual aid, debt relief within the group, not revolutions. Parallel logic. Rome crushed armies easily, but this moved with people, survived pressure, survived loss, and slowly, Rome adapted. By the 4th century, it absorbed the framework it once feared. Force alone was no longer enough. Moral credibility mattered. Final reflection systems don't collapse because they're unjust. They collapse when the stories that justify them stop working. Rome optimized extraction, but it never repaired the moral breach. And once people stop believing suffering is necessary, power has to defend itself differently. History doesn't repeat, but it reveals patterns. And once you see how power protects itself, not just with force, but with stories, those stories stop feeling accidental. If this gave you a new way to see history, if it made you question how power really works, subscribe to Finance TED Official, because history doesn't hide the truth, just waits for someone to connect the dots.